will be talking about a very, let's say, sensitive subject. It's related to gender-based violence in Kuwait. And basically, because we are in this period of time, and every year in which the international campaign to eliminate gender-based violence and mainly violence against women starts. It starts on the 25th of November and commences till the 10th of December. And therefore you'll see NGOs, national, let's say non-profit organizations, non-government organizations, civil society hold activities, workshops, seminars, lots of events to raise public awareness on the gender-based violence, to enlighten women with their rights and, you know, freedoms and rights according to the national laws, enlighten them more about what is the gender-based violence, how to combat it, how to prevent it, and how to limit it.
Yes, of course, Atyab, as you just mentioned, could you tell us more about the root causes of the gender-based violence here in Kuwait?
Yes, so first and foremost, before we dig deep into that subject, we have to differentiate between the gender-based violence and violence against women. Because the gender-based violence is a concept that was created from a cultural perspective more than it is biological. So when we say gender-based violence, anyone can be subject to that violence, including men, not only women. So when it comes to violence against women, we're talking about a biological manner, a gender basically, in which women are being subject to violence. But gender-based violence is a concept, as I told you, a cultural concept. For example, I'm a woman here, and let's say, for example, if I wanted to, let's say, tackle my role within the culture, you'll find me, as the culture explained, usually the role that I do is always in-house. Somehow, you know, I'm limited to doing housework, being a mother, teaching, cooking. There are, like, you know, stereotyped roles in which I'm always explained. But when it comes to men, you see, there are another roles according to the culture that we have that they are restricted to be in. You would hardly find a man cooking or cleaning, but it's the exact opposite when it comes to men, because you will hardly find women going into, say, parliamentarian positions and decision making, becoming ministers, and it had only taken place in the late decades. But earlier, we'll see the root causes and you'll see the culture giving each one of us a certain role. And this is why you'll see women in a part and in a kind of, let's say, concept in which they practice a role. You'll see that roles even in the curriculums that we study. So women teach, women cook, women clean. And you will see a role in that for men too when they, you know, run for elections, when they join army and they join military or so. And therefore the gender-based violence is actually based on what we learn about the role of a woman and a role of a man. And, you know, people in Kuwait think that gender-based violence is violence against women, but as I told you that there are different, because it's not based on biological matters, but more of cultural aspects and perspective. And this is why, as I explained earlier, the gender-based violence, men can be subject to gender-based violence. And you know, we have this violence for lots of reasons. First of all, because we have lack of understanding to what is human rights, women's rights, gender equality. These are all, let's say, means of human development, human understanding, human communication, and we do lack the understanding of what is to be human rights. And of course we have discrimination, basically discrimination against women. We have lack of law implementation in the country. So you see, we do have legislators, we do have laws, but when it comes to actual implementation, we have lots of examples to explain how women are being, you know, they're not being served by the law nor the law applicators. When a woman faces, let's say, abuses from a family member, for example,
yes,
and she goes to report for a police station, unfortunately, not in every chance the police station will cooperate, or the police officer. In fact, you will see them trying to calm down the situation and asking the woman to go back to the abuser, which is illogical because she can never go back to a person who abused her and then, continue with the abusement scenario. And this is not helping at all. And this is one of the facts that makes us face the gender-based violence in the country, in which when women go to report before the public prosecution, before the police station mainly, their claims will not be always listened to or heard or, let's say, believed. And of course, as I told you, because we don't have sufficient enlightenment to what is the concept of women empowerment and what is gender-based violence and how to combat it, the means of it, and as I have explained earlier, that we hardly understand the difference between gender-based violence and violence against women.
Of course, and almost all women who face gender-based violence do not report on such accidents.
Sorry.
So why is that exactly? As you mentioned, they might be calming them down. So that's one of the reasons why they don't report it.
Okay. Yeah. So as I told you, when women go to report, there are, let's say, legal reasons in which they may not go to report, and other cultural reasons.
Yes.
So to women, if a woman wanted to report, she either be defamed or she feels like she's in a scandal in which she cannot expose herself to such, and then she will not be socially accepted by the community.
Yes.
And therefore she would prefer to be quiet about it and be abused rather than be defamed or shamed by the members of the community, in which she would prefer to be silenced. And this is a matter of not understanding how risky is her situation and serious. And this is what's happening to the women in here. When they want to go to report, they really reconsider on, will I ever be accepted again by the community? Because we have a very restricted culture, and we have cultural constraints in which women would be very careful before they report on something. This is number one. Number two, as I explained earlier, when women try to report to let's say government officials such as police officers, as I explained, there is a lack of law implementation. See, we have the law of the domestic violence. When it comes to actual implementation of the law, you will not find a sufficient and efficient implementation so as to protect women around the country. And because there is one, as I said, legal aspect in which we should tackle in here. When it comes to evidence and proving that women been facing violence, it is hard for a woman to prove that she has been slapped, or let's say she has been beaten, if there was no bruises in her body.
Yes.
I mean, it's not like when she gets, raped or sexual abuses or something. She is going to go to the forensic medical department, in which she will be examined and get a report, which is, something that can be proved. But when it comes to slapping, devaluing by a spouse, by a family member, when she gets, mentally and physiologically abused, how can we prove that unless she reach the incitement of, let's say, depression, in which she might be able to get a medical report from a specialized doctor?
Yes.
But most of the cases that we face, we have lack of evidence. So when she gets slapped, beaten. Also, let's consider eyewitnesses. When it comes to domestic violence, see, you don't have a person in most of the houses and women in the country. They don't have a person who is willing to cooperate and go to witness against the abuser, or they don't have anyone at all in the house. So let's say if someone is newly married, so they're just couples, and unfortunately, let's say the male spouse is an abuser. In this kind of situation, woman will not have any eyewitness to go and state that she has been, physically or even mentally abused. Some of the solutions to combat gender-based violence is to talk it through among women communities and women's civil society movements. And this is why it is essential within this period of time, from the 25th of November till the 10th of December, the international campaign to eliminate gender-based violence and violence against women, is for women to talk it through and talk over about if they ever are facing, let's say, physical abuse abuse, mental, sexual harassment, or financial abuse.
Yes.
So this is one of the main, let's say, questions that we're going to tackle later is type of abuses. But for now, I really want to point out the importance of the movement of civil society and legal awareness, public awareness campaigns about gender-based violence.
Of course. So what is the definition of gender-based violence according to the national laws and types of violence, of course?
Okay, so according to Law 16 for the year 2020, which regulated the domestic violence, violence within the house, stated that the violence could be any act, committing an act or depriving from committing an obligation that you're stated to do by the law, whether if it was physical, let's say sexual or physiological, whether if it was through committing something or preventing from committing an obligation, which could cause an abuse or a harm for an individual. And there are types, as I mentioned earlier. So there is a physical abuse, as you and I know it already. Physical abuse could be, slapping, beating to death, unfortunately, torturing or starving, when you starve someone and lock them and not providing them with any type of, feeding or even depriving them from health, let's say, health care. This is a form of physical abuse. There is emotional abuse, which contain physiological exploitation. So when someone, for example, manipulate with another person, let's say devaluing them all the time, treat them badly in a way that would really affect their physiological health, that could be a sign of physiological abuse. And we have also sexual abuse, which could be raping, sexual harassment, sexual exploitation, and we see a lot of forms like that spreaded in the country. And of course, when we talk about traditional or cultural treatments when it comes to early marriage of girls around the age of, let's say,
in the teenage years.
In the teenage years,
yes.
Exactly. This could be a form of abuse because the national laws has guarded women not to get married very early. Okay, so if ever happen to a woman, or let's say to a teen, to get married within that age, then this is an abuse also.
Yes, of course. So what are the legal remedies and safety measurements supplemented by the law to combat gender-based violence?
Yeah, okay. So according to the same law number 16 for the year 2020, the law stipulated in more than one article establishing shelters, committees, let's say initiatives to combat gender-based violence. So you have the National Committee to Combat Gender-Based Violence, which was stipulated in Article 1 according to that law. So that law initiated a committee that should tackle gender-based violence and, let's say, domestic violence basically, and try to understand the root causes of it, why is it there, how to handle it, and solutions. Of Article 5 that stated we have to initiate shelters, and since 2020 when the law was let's say initiated, unfortunately till today there are no shelters for women. So we can determine and say that the law is not fully implemented, and yet women are not secured within the law. And this is one of the lack of implementation mechanisms. Also, Article number 9 gave the legal eligibility for any person to report against any violation if it was a domestic violation. So the Criminal Act of Kuwait stated that if someone wanted to report on a violation, it has to be the victim itself or an eyewitness to report on it, okay? So there are two types of ways to report. But we see that law number 16 for the year 2020 expanded the ways in which you can report on a gender-based violence or woman-based violence, in which any person who can see or know or come into his mind and knowledge that there is gender-based violence, then he has the legal eligibility in which he can report